Hey guys, we are almost through this semester. Isn't that crazy? Which just feels weird for March. Today we're talking about interest groups. Next week we'll talk about voting, campaigns, and elections, and your fourth quiz will be posted next week. Don't forget you have a week to take those before they expire. Then, of course, you have spring break. The week after that, we have media, power, and political communication. And then the following week, Monday, April 25th, your essay will be due. And then your final exam will be posted. Your final exam is due on May 2nd. So coming up. All right, always email me if you have any questions. All right, so interest groups. Sorry, got a random text. Okay, so your textbook, I love to start out with what your textbook starts out with because I think it's so interesting how they try to relate everything back together. But it starts out talking about interest groups, specifically with healthcare reform. In 1994, there was a commercial featuring a couple called Harry and Louise. And they killed healthcare reform in 1994. It was a commercial that featured this worried couple named Harry and Louise talking about the fear over a government-run healthcare. And at that point, an apprehensive public was really easily persuaded that the government involvement in healthcare meant they would lose their freedom about what doctor to see, what care they would receive, because it fit into this pre-existing narrative about the dangers of big government. Bill Clinton was president at the time. He really failed to counter this effectively, and thus the healthcare industry scored a really big victory. Healthcare reform was dead for 16 years after that. The lessons that were learned here, that Obama learned when getting Obamacare passed through, were that number one, Congress needed to get involved from the start, and number two, he needed to do something to bring relative interest groups to the table. But what was at stake in Obama consorting with the enemy to get it done? Consorting with the enemy being interest groups. What was healthcare, was bringing healthcare groups into the reform process at an early stage really necessary to keep them from making this too big of a narrative to pass? Alexis de Tocqueville noted the peculiar tendency for Americans to join forces. We join forces all the time with our friends, our neighbors, our colleagues. And he said Americans of all ages, all conditions, and all dispositions are constantly forming associations, which is so true. I mean, just think about your life. We not only have commercial and manufacturing companies, all which take part, but there are associations of 1,000 other kinds: religious, moral, serious, futile, general, restricted, enormous, diminutive. And now with social media, guys, we are connected in ways that he could not even have imagined. He wasn't specifically talking about factions here, but of course Madison had already noted Americans' propensity to form political associations, factions, which is a group of citizens united by some common passion or interest and opposed to the rights of other citizens or the interests of the whole community. Madison feared that factions would weaken and destabilize the republic, but he also believed, as he argued in Federalist Number 10, that a large republic could contain the effects of factions by making it hard for potential members to find one another, and by providing for so many potential political groups that if they did find each other and organize, their very members would cancel each other out. Modern political scientists call factions interest groups. These are organizations of individuals who share a common political goal and unite for the purpose of influencing government decisions. Parties also seek to influence policy, but they do so by sponsoring candidates in election and by running governments. Political scientists don't believe that they are all interest groups opposed to the broad public interest the way Madison thought they were. Instead, they hold that interest groups can play an important role in our democracy, ensuring the views of organized interests are heard in the governing process. Interest groups play a really central role in what's called the pluralist theory of democracy that argues that democracy is enhanced when citizen interests are represented through group membership. The group interaction ensures that members' interests are represented, but also that no group can be too powerful. Interest groups have always existed, but they weren't really this full force until the beginning of the 20th century, honestly, when progressive reformers opened up the political process to the people. Political parties kind of got weakened and interest groups correspondingly strengthened. Interest groups accelerated after 1971 when the Federal Election Campaign Act was passed in effort to curb campaign spending abuses. Political action committees, the fundraising arms of interest groups, were formed. They're a PAC, a political action committee. They're limited in how much you can donate to a candidate, but there are loopholes that allow you to get around some of the restrictions. There's something called a super PAC, which I have talked a little bit about before, which is a special PAC that can spend unlimited amounts of money on a candidate's behalf, but they're not allowed to coordinate their efforts with those of the candidate's campaign. A lot of PACs are creatures of interest groups, but others are independent and act as an interest group in their own right. PACs have become extremely powerful players in American politics, typically contributing a large portion of candidates' campaign funds. But just how much campaign money should be supplied by outside groups and to what extent it obligates the candidates to do so really became an issue in 2016. Honestly, James Madison would probably be rolling over in his grave with the explosion of interest group activity today. He really thought he had secured the Republic against the mischiefs of fashion. He couldn't imagine a world where mass transportation and communication systems has really shrunk the size of the large Republic that he thought would isolate these groups. Critics argue that interest groups have too much power and they unduly influence officials who want their financial support. They don't effectively represent the interest groups that don't organize, the poor, the homeless, the young, and that clog up the vital arteries of American democracy, leading to gridlock and stagnation. Supporters echo Madison's pluralist hopes that group politics can preserve political stability by containing and regulating conflict and by providing checks on any one group's power. They argue that the interest groups have a positive role to play in the democratic process. Why do people join groups? These interest groups play a really significant role in determining who gets what in American politics. But why do we join groups? A lot of us can think of public problems that we think need to be addressed, maybe a pothole that needs to be filled, or tuition is too high, but we usually act together to solve these problems. You're not going to go organize a group, probably. Sometime you won't even join one. Maybe you do, maybe you're a leader. But this is a collective action problem. This is the difficulty in getting people to work together to achieve a common goal when the solution is costly and no one individual has incentive to use resources to make it happen. This usually involves a collective good, which is a good or service that by its very nature cannot be denied to anyone who wants to consume it. These are things like safe roads, better education, sustainability of the planet. Collective goods once they're produced, they can be enjoyed by anyone. It's difficult to persuade people to join groups because they're going to reap the benefits anyway. There are something called free riders, who are people who refuse to spend time, money, or effort on the collective solution because they can reap the benefits whether they join or not. The larger number of people involved, the more this holds true because each will have trouble seeing that his or her efforts are making a difference. The common problem or threat here is that most interest groups are organized around shared interests, but many people who share interests don't ever come together at all. There usually is a key triggering mechanism for formation. This could be like a disturbance in the social or political or economic environment that threatens the members of a group or alerts them that they need to organize to protect their interests through political action. Sometimes the formation of one group will trigger the formation of a group on the opposite side. Some groups form more easily, even without external threat, but resources available seem to be key here. More money means better websites, social networking, campaigns, publicity, legal assistance, professional lobbying to help get the message to DC. Those with greater resources also tend to understand the political process and have the confidence to express their views and to appreciate the value of organizing. Effective and charismatic leaders can help spur the formation of an interest group. If you have like an interest group entrepreneur, this is crucial to a group's organization, or no matter what the resources are. These are going to be like Ralph Nader, who founded a lot of consumer interest groups, Candy Lightner, who founded Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Groups frequently use selective incentives to induce people to join. These are benefits that are only available to group members as an inducement to get them to join a group. They could be a material benefit, a solidary benefit, or an expressive benefit. Material means a selective incentive in the form of a tangible reward. Like a group could publish a magazine with information about issues important to issues important to that group. Like an NRA sponsors a hunting competition. The Sierra Club offers nature treks. And then there's solidary benefits. These are selective incentives in the form of tangible rewards. Some people find politics enjoyable, like me, and the social interaction satisfactory, so making this a strong motivating force. You may want to go on a lobbying trip to DC sometime. The significant point here is that the interest group can provide the venue through which friendships are made and social interactions occur. And then there's something called expressive benefits. These are selective incentives that derive from the opportunity to express values and beliefs and to be committed to a greater cause. These are rewards that come from doing something that you're already strongly believing in, some that you want to affiliate yourself to a purpose where you're already deeply committed. For example, like the National Right to Life that believes passionately in making abortions illegal. Membership in their group is a way of expressing your values and ideals. Some of the roles of interest groups. Interest groups are integral, but are they a curse on the system like Madison thought? They play important roles in political representation, participation, education, agenda building, and program monitoring. It's possible that the most important thing about you is not where you live, right? Probably not. But congressional representation pretty much sticks our interests as they are related to where you live. Interest groups help represent your views to DC in another way. Lobbying. This is interest group activities aimed at persuading policymakers to support the group's position. Y'all, this is what I do for a living. I'm a lobbyist. It is the central activity of an interest group and encompasses a variety of ways bringing pressure to bear on government. Participation. So we have opportunities for participation in our government, but they're pretty limited by the Constitution. So interest groups provide more of an action or more of an avenue for participation in politics that goes beyond voting or running for office. Sometimes individual political action seems futile, so channeling efforts through a group sometimes can feel more effective, and it is sometimes. Education. Interest groups have an important role to educate policymakers on issues important to them. Y'all, members of Congress have so much going on. They cannot be an expert on all 20,000 bills they have to look at that year. They often find themselves legislating on matters where they don't have a lot of knowledge. And so interest groups come in to fill this void, to provide details in hearings and briefing on issues about where they are often the experts. I represent a lot of cities and counties, and so I bring my cities to talk to their member of Congress and say, hey, we're having this problem in this city. You probably didn't even realize this was going on, but I'm bringing it to your attention because I'm seeing it as an expert in this world. So that is a role of a lobbyist, the role of an interest group at that point. Agenda building. Interest groups work to get the issues they care about onto the agendas of the NDC and to make them a high priority for action. So here I come again. Hey, this is my problem going on in this city. I need you to put it on your agenda. It's on your radar now. I need you to think about this. I have a city that needs a new zip code. It's not in South Carolina. And suddenly there was an avenue for a new zip code that came about last week, and they called me because I had brought it up one time before. Agenda building. Provision of program alternatives. Once they're on a program agenda, interest groups supply alternative suggestions for how this should be dealt with. And then the political actors can suggest a solution. And then program monitoring. Once laws are enacted, interest groups keep tabs on their consequences, informing Congress and regulatory agencies about their effects, intended and unintended. This helps the government decide on whether to change a policy or to keep a policy or to change it. And it also keeps politicians accountable by ensuring that somebody's paying attention. There are potentially as many interest groups as there are interests. Endless, right? It's helpful to divide them into different types based on what kind of benefit they seek for their members. Is it an economic benefit, equal opportunity, a public or government? Economic interest groups are groups that organize to influence government policy for the economic benefit of their members. The benefits can be higher wages, lower taxes, bigger government subsidies, more favorable regulations. They're all focused on pocketbook issues. The government plays a big role in corporate and business associations as well. So the government plays a big role in regulating the economy and defining ground rules for economic competition. So a lot of interest groups that lobby in DC are hire professionals that are business related. For example, we did something called Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform in 2010. Wall Street spent about $1.5 million a day to influence the implementation of this law. Usually they're going to be dealing with issues like taxes, labor, regulatory issues, or things like education, welfare reform, health insurance. There are more than 600 corporations in DC that keep full-time DC offices to deal with government relations. This is not counting those who hire out independent lobbyists or those who lobby in a corporation with other businesses. These are associations like maybe the National Frozen Pizza Institute, the Tobacco Institute. And then there's businesses also joined together in associations like the Associated Builders and Contractors, the Business Roundtable, the Chamber of Commerce. These represents a whole host of businesses that spend a lot of money on elections. And then unions and professional organizations. Interest groups often organize in response to each other. Labor unions don't represent the full force that they once did, but they can still be formidable. Public employees are a large segment of America's union represented workforce, and there are a lot of occupations that require a lot of training or education that have formed professional associations. They want to promote policies that enhance their position. For example, like the American Medical Association, they want to lobby maybe for lowering malpractice awards or something like that. Then you're going to have agricultural interest groups. Farming is so interesting because everybody depends on food, but it's also subject to things like climate and other things beyond human control. So the United States has long subsidized and regulated agriculture to keep food at affordable levels. Less than 2% of the workforce is involved in farming, but there's a large network of interest groups that pursue policies favorable to agriculture. This is like the American Farm Bureau. And then we have equal opportunity interest groups, which are groups that organize to promote the civil and economic rights of underrepresented or disadvantaged groups. They often advocate because they're economically disadvantaged or at risk of becoming so. They believe their members are underrepresented not because of what they do, but because of who they are. Age. This is one of the fastest growing segments of the population as people 65 and older. AARP, the Association of Retired Persons, American Association of Retired Persons, has about 38 million members because it only takes $16 a year to be a member and you get a lot of benefits. Race and ethnicity, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, founded in 1909 in response to race riots, has a long history of fighting segregation and promoting equal opportunity. Gender, the National Organization for Women. It's a large group dealing with the equal treatment of women. Sexual orientation, these are other groups. The sexual revolution of the 60s and 70s came gay and lesbian groups formed to fight discriminatory laws and practices based on sexual orientation. So public interest groups are groups that organize to influence government to produce collective goods or services that benefits the general public. Like, for example, the benefits of clean air are available to all, not just the members of the group that fought for them. They're usually motivated by a view of the world that they think everyone else would be better off to adopt. They believe that the benefit they seek is good for everyone, even if individuals outside the group may reject the benefit. People are drawn to public interest groups because they usually support the group's values and goals. Expressive benefits are the primary draw for membership. When an event occurs that threatens the goals of a public interest group, that's when membership increases, right? For example, when Reagan was elected, a lot of folks thought that the Republicans were going to dismantle environmental laws. So they flocked to groups like the Sierra Club and the National Wildlife Federation. Then there's environmental groups, starting with Earth Day in 1970. Environmental groups have been actively engaged in promoting environmental policies. Consumer groups, Ralph Nader and his group Public Citizen have become synonymous with the cause of consumer protectionism. Religious groups have had a long history of interest group activity dating back to the abolitionist movement. They respond to what they describe as the moral decay and decadence of American society. The Christian Coalition is a powerful religious fundamental group, lobbying on political issues and providing members with voters' guides. Second Amendment groups. Of course, the NRA is opposed to almost any effort to control and regulate the sale and distribution of firearms and has had a lot of success, which can be credited to its highly dedicated members who are willing to contribute time, resources, and votes to candidates who support their positions. Reproductive right groups. After Roe versus Wade in 1973 that granted women the right to an abortion, a lot of interest groups were formed. Pro-choice groups like the National Abortion Rights on Action League, Planned Parenthood. Pro-life groups, the National Right to Life Committee, Operation Rescue. And then there are other public interest groups that maybe target the issue of human life. The ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union. They claim to be the nation's guardians of liberty. Amnesty International promotes human rights worldwide. Animal rights, the Humane Society. PETA, the interest group that promotes the rights on animals. There's so many interest groups out there, guys. And then there's government interest groups. These are groups that organize to represent foreign or domestic governments and to lobby the Congress and the president on their behalf. This is typically a lucrative contract for a lobby from a foreign government to seek to influence foreign trade policies. There are a lot of ethics rules involved in preventing a former government official from working as a foreign government lobbyist, but lobbying firms continue to hire them when they can because of their contacts and expertise. Interest group politics. So the term lobbying comes from 17th century England, where representatives, I'm never going to get over this cold, where representatives of special interests would meet members of the English House of Commons in the large anteroom or a lobby outside the Commons floor to plead their cases. They would meet in the lobby to talk about what's going on. Lobbyists, right? Of course, we don't do that anymore. And right now, it's even hard to see people because of COVID and the Capitol security and things like that in DC. But we reach far beyond the lobby of the House or Senate now. Interest groups contact lawmakers directly, but they're no longer confirmed to a chance meeting in a lobby. Lobbying targets all branches of the government and the American people. Lobbying is a big business, and there's two main types, direct and indirect. Direct lobbying is a direct interaction with public officials for the purpose of influencing policy decisions, inside lobbying. Typically, Congress is the recipient here. And then there's indirect lobbying. These are attempts to influence the government policymaking by encouraging the general public to put pressure on them, making a social movement to have a demand heard. When an interest group lobbies DC, it doesn't focus on all 435 members of the House or 100 members of the Senate. You focus on the congressional committees or the members who are going to help you. I don't call all members of Congress if I'm dealing with an issue in Lander County, Nevada. I call Representative Mark Amodei from that area so I can have him help me with this issue. Some of the strategies on congressional lobbying are appointments, banquets, parties, lunches, casual meetings in hallways. This is kind of the most effective form of lobbying. Much of modern lobbying involves using the use of professional lobbyists, in-house employees dedicated to advancing interests. Having access to power and knowledge about how the government works is why this is key to getting things done and why so many are former government officials. Revolving door. This is the tendency of a public official, a journalist, and a lobby to move between public and private sector jobs back and forth. Almost everybody who has lobbied has worked on Capitol Hill. Sometimes you go back and forth. The founder of my company was a member of Congress, so he has a lot of contacts from that as well. They parlay their special knowledge and contacts that they gathered into the private sector. Interest groups lobby decision makers also by providing testimony and expertise. Like I talked about earlier, members of Congress aren't experts at all of this, and so they'll call somebody who is an expert. This can bring value and long-term credibility with members of Congress. They also contribute to campaigns. Giving money to candidates is another lobbying technique that helps interest groups gain access in a friendly ear. Coalition forming. Interest groups attempt to bolster lobbying efforts by forming coalitions with other interests. I like doing this. This is one of my favorite parts of my job. Finding somebody else who has the same problem as me and working together to find the solution. Because then you're going to have more people talking about it and it's going to become a bigger deal. Building coalitions is an important strategy in lobbying Congress. Attempts at lobbying reform. There's a lot of attempts to regulate the tight relationship between lobbyist and lawmaker. Lawmakers benefit a lot from a relationship with lobbyists, though, and so they're not enthusiastic about curtailing their opportunities to get money and show support. There are a couple of different pieces of legislation that require lobbyists to show how much they're paid, by whom, and what issues they're promoting. That's the Lobbying Disclosure Act. And then in 2007, the Honest Leadership and Open Government Act tightened travel and gift restrictions. I worked on Capitol Hill before and after that law, and it was a lot more fun to work on Capitol Hill before that law. You could get a lot more free, fun things, and then they tightened all of that up. Direct lobbying the president. Personal contacts within the White House are really important. The higher up in the White House, the better, right? You want to foster good relationships between the White House and interest groups, and each White House cultivates groups that they think are most ideologically comfortable. I work for a bipartisan firm, so it's important that whoever is going to be in the White House, we will have folks in my firm who can get that access, both in the White House and in the bureaucracy. Direct lobbying in the bureaucracy. Of course, winning the legislative battle is only the first step. Second, and sometimes the most important battle, especially right now, takes place in the bureaucracy when Congress has delegated rulemaking to the federal agencies that implement the laws. We've passed a lot of pieces of legislation recently that gives a lot of money to our state and local governments, but it matters what maybe the Department of the Treasury says how it's going to be implemented as to how they're actually going to get their money. We spend a lot of time saying, oh, we got to wait on the regulations from Treasury before we can tell you how you're going to get your money. Lobbying the bureaucracy is very important. And then direct lobbying the court. Interest groups also try to influence government policy by challenging the legality of laws. Sometimes they bring a case directly to the court. Sometimes they will file an amicus brief. Indirect lobbying the public. One of the most powerful and fastest growing kinds of lobbying is indirect lobbying. For example, the Harry and Louise commercials that I talked about earlier, using public opinion to put pressure on politics to do what they want. Much of it consists of telling a compelling story and getting the public to buy it. Educating the public, a lot also involves building and disseminating a compelling narrative, seeing things through the preferred frame of the interest group. Issue advocacy ads. These are advertisements that support issues or candidates without telling constituents how to vote. As long as they don't specifically promote the election or defeat of a particular candidate, issue advocacy ads aren't subject to limitations. A PAC can spend all the money it wants on ads promoting an issue and, by implication, the candidates of its choice. There have been reforms that have lifted some of these restrictions. Now they can directly advocate for or against candidates as well as their issue positions. Mobilizing the public. The point of disseminating information is to motivate the public to lobby politicians themselves. On most issues, the general public interest is low, and groups need to rely on their own members for support. Maybe some unconventional methods, social protest and mass movements. Social protests are public activities designed to bring attention to a political cause. This is usually generated by those without access to conventional means of expressing their views. It provides a way for people to disseminate a narrative expressing their agreement or disagreement with a public policy action. Then there's something called grassroots lobbying. This is an indirect lobbying effort that springs from a widespread public concern, addressing people as their role as an ordinary citizen. Then you have astroturf lobbying, which is an indirect effort that can manipulate or create public sentiment, astroturf being artificial grassroots, indicating that it's not genuine. Some people claim that direct lobbying will become less important as indirect lobbying becomes more effective and popular. Is indirect lobbying more democratic because it manipulates public opinion? It might be the opposite. As campaigns get more expensive, groups that can afford to participate will decline. Interest group resources. Interest group success depends in large part on the resources a group can bring to the project of influencing the government. Pluralist defense is that all citizens have the opportunity to organize, so all can exercise equal power, but not all interest groups are created equally. Some have money, some have good leadership, some have a lot of members, some have a lot of power. This makes real differences. Interest groups need money to conduct the business of trying to influence government policymakers. They need well-trained staff, campaign contributions. This doesn't guarantee success, but not having money just about guarantees failure. Staff. Money enables an interest group to hire professional staff and enables them to hire a professional lobbyists and enables them to hire a public relations professional. Campaign contributions. In order to receive, you've got to give and give a lot to important people. An intangible element of success or failure of an interest group is an effective and charismatic leader. This can really help a group organize even if it lacks other resources. Membership size and intensity is important. Of course, size is important, but the level of intensity that members support and its support of the group is also crucial. Members represent the lifeblood of the interest group because they generally fund its activities. One of the most powerful resources in an interest group's arsenal is information. You learn about different things by the information you're getting. What about citizens? Defenders of pluralism believe that the interest group formation helps give more power to more citizens. It can certainly enhance democratic life, offers more channels for representation, participation, education, public agenda building, and it keeps politicians accountable. Pluralists also believe that the system as a whole benefits from interest group politics. If no single interest group commands a majority, interest groups will compete with one another and ultimately form coalitions, like I talked about earlier, to create a majority. Money, leadership, membership, and information can make an interest group successful, but this also raises red danger flags for democracy. We value political equality, one person, one vote, and anyone who attempts to vote twice will be turned away, no matter how rich you are. But y'all, policy is not made at the ballot box. It's made in the halls of Congress, in conference rooms of a bureaucracy, in a corporate boardroom, in private offices, in restaurants, and bars. Interest groups, y'all. Interest groups speak loudly here, and they have equivalent of the extra votes in the policymaking process. All right, guys, that is it for interest groups. Thanks for hanging with me. I'll be back next week with voting campaigns and elections and your fourth quiz. Please email me at my Gmail if you have any questions. Thanks.